Let's just make this clear right up front. This is a one-to-one graphical remake of The Last of Us, with no changes to the story or gameplay whatsoever. So Sony now thinks they can charge $70 fucking for a purely graphical remake of a game that's not even a decade old, and if you ask me, graphics haven't even come that far since 2013. And look, I know this is a purely subjective thing, but I've never been one to actually care about graphics in terms of realism, fidelity, number of polygons. I really don't care how realistic video games can look to real life. That does not stir my imagination. It doesn't fill me with joys of escapism or immersion or any of that. Honestly, I want games to look less like reality, not more. That doesn't mean I think graphics should be worse. It's just not important to me at all. And so, if you're completely fine with blowing $70 fucking plus tax for a purely graphical facelift to this game, even then, I'm not convinced. This game is undoubtedly better looking than the first in terms of, again, trying to capture that realism factor. But in terms of soul, and yes, that is a meme word in certain communities, but long story short, it just means nothing about this feels handcrafted. There's no style to it, again, because it's just pure emulation of reality. The original Last of Us, even though it tried to be as realistic as the technology allowed on the PS3 at the time, still had a certain small amount of stylization to it, a certain aesthetic, because it couldn't emulate reality. Now that's completely gone. And whether it's intentional or not, all the women are uglier in this game. Tess, looking at least a decade older than she did in the original game. She looks like a chain-smoking meth head now, or in her mid-50s at the least. And I have no idea how old she's supposed to be, but this is not what she looked like in the first game. You've seen the graphics comparisons, it's just bad. And Joel probably looks more his age, but again, it's just kind of distracting. Just earlier this year, we had Horizon Forbidden West, which had a very obvious, concerted attempt to make characters as ugly as humanly possible. And you can't convince me that that wasn't on purpose, because the actual lore of the Horizon franchise is that all of these humans, like 10,000 years in the future, or however many years, I don't quite remember, all of them are clones of DNA taken from the original humans of the modern day or near future, right? So that means that the scientists or these machines or whatever purposely chose the ugliest human beings to pass on their genetics to the far future. Literal dysgenics. You can't make this up. And again, it just reflects left-wing ideology. Everyone has to be ugly because that makes everything inclusive. If you stare at beauty, you're envious and you feel insecure, right? Fiction is supposed to be beautiful. You're making these highly detailed, realistic environments, right? Which some people love. Again, unless it's more fantasy or sci-fi, it doesn't really do it for me. But if you want video games to look as realistic as possible, Sony has been doing a great job of that, right? But then when you look at the human beings, and they look like any Joe Schmo you see at fucking Walmart, that just takes me out of it. All throughout history, art is beautiful, and now all of a sudden it's ugly communist bullshit. And so I know I've gone way off topic onto The Last of Us, but the truth is there's not much to actually talk about. I don't need to talk about the gameplay, really. If you played The Last of Us 9 years ago, or, you played the PS4 remaster 7 or 8 years ago, then you've already played this game. All I can say is, even back in the day, I was not that impressed with the gameplay. They're obviously going for a certain more realistic style to everything, where bullets are very scarce. Joel's aim is unsteady with handguns. Because it's on a controller, it's hard to aim, period, which kind of adds to the tension. So some people like that sort of thing, but to me, gunplay needs to be smooth, no matter what. That is way more important than the immersion factor, or just fitting the game thematically. If it's not fun to actually engage in combat, I'm not gonna like it no matter how much it fits the game tonally. And so Last of Us's combat is okay, it's fine. Guns at least feel powerful. Melee, not so much, but it's supposed to be a last resort, obviously. And melee weapons break too, which adds to the tension. Clickers can kill you instantly, and you have to use a shiv to kill them, and it instantly uses up that shiv, so they feel pretty dangerous. I also like that crafting mid-combat doesn't pause the game, so if you're not prepared for a situation or you just used your last nail bomb, you can quickly make another one, but you have to make sure to do it while you're not detected, or at least do it quickly enough before enemies flank you. So all of that makes for a fairly satisfying experience. I don't think the combat, though, is fun for the entire game. It sort of runs out of steam about 2/3 of the way through as they stop throwing new enemy types at you, which is a very common problem with modern games, I've noticed. Enemy variety seems to be greatly undervalued by most developers not named From Software. But other than that, the gameplay is fine, I guess. Scavenging around for materials is fine. The level design is really what I have a problem with, and this is every fucking Naughty Dog game since Uncharted 1. They're hyper-linear with small open areas to make it feel a little bit less annoying and repetitive. I think linear games are fine. The problem is you need to have replayability in some other way. This game has virtually no replayability, which is one of my biggest problems with them releasing it yet again as a remake with no fucking changes whatsoever other than graphically. There is quite honestly no reason to play The Last of Us 1 again if you've already played it, unless you've completely forgotten the story. And I'll say this as a compliment to The Last of Us, it had a very memorable story, so I didn't really ever have a desire to play it again. I never did play it again in these 9 years. And so even when I was playing it again, I remembered the story beats, even though I'd forgotten most of the combat encounters because, again, they're just not that well designed or memorable. Intense sometimes, and you can die very easily, but definitely not memorable. For various reasons. I mean, compare this to Resident Evil 4, and it's like fucking night and day. I could probably tell you every single encounter from Resident Evil 4 off the top of my head if you gave me enough time. This game goes for the Uncharted approach, which on the one hand makes a select few encounters pretty memorable, but there's such a swarm of minor ones that really have nothing unique about them and you're fighting the same handful of enemies, that about 80% of them are going to be gone from your brain within a week of playing this, I promise you. And then we have what I like to call the cinematic action game problem. Naughty Dog was definitely one of the pioneers of finding clever ways to hide loading screens. Unfortunately, after dealing with them for more than a decade, they don't feel so clever anymore. I think we all know these by now. Whether it be really slow-paced puzzles with extremely obvious solutions, like grabbing a fucking plank of wood and carrying it somewhere else. Yeah, that doesn't get tiring after just the second time you have to do it. And yet there's plenty of these, like Ellie not being able to swim so you have to find pallets, or activating a generator, or setting up a ladder. You know what I'm talking about. And there's also these forced walking sequences. Who the hell has ever liked the forced walking sequence? The type of shit we're all sick of seeing in Assassin's Creed, but I guess Sony can get away with this just fine because the story is more engaging. Oh yeah, and if it wasn't obvious, extreme spoiler warning from here on out. I'll put a timestamp to when I stop talking about it, as I pretty much spoil a bunch of story beats here. The reason why people say it's so good, and this isn't even me disputing it, because I kind of agree, is that the execution, at least emotionally and with the animation and the graphics, the voice acting, all of that is top-notch, so you definitely feel the emotions. When Sarah dies in the beginning, even though you've only known her for 5 minutes, you still feel it. The first time I played this game in 2013, I shed a tear, I did. I'm not afraid to admit it. Now, these days, definitely not. It takes a little bit more emotional development than that to make me feel for a character. But even still, remembering Tess's infection early on, Sam getting infected and Henry shooting himself, Ellie having to kill that rapist guy, all of these are huge emotional moments. Even if you haven't played the game before and you predict a lot of these things happening, because again, they kind of are just zombie apocalypse tropes, it is executed so well that it will absolutely win you over. One of the improvements with this game is that the motion capture is a bit better. They spend a lot of time on the facial animations. Sometimes it does dip into the uncanny territory. I'm just gonna bring that up again because it's definitely true. But a lot of it really is top notch. But still, man, it's so fucking generic. The Last of Us is full of zombie and general post-apocalypse tropes that we've all seen in media before. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. A lot of media is derivative, but let's be honest, Last of Us really just doesn't have anything unique to its name that gives it an identity, except maybe the zombies themselves. The concept of the cordyceps fungus mutating, or perhaps through gain-of-function research, was able to infect and take over humans, turning them into, just zombies, basically, is kind of interesting. But even that, it's really just not enough. This is really the Joel and Ellie story, and Naughty Dog obviously wants it to be just the Ellie saga. Judging by the new box art, which is just fucking comical, dude. Look how big Ellie is and how tiny Joel is. This is fucking Naughty Dog in a nutshell. And speaking of which, the best part of this game, to me, has always been the ending. I find it funny that it's such a source of controversy, because really that's what any father should do. If you would sacrifice your daughter on the chance that maybe they could find a cure for the zombie virus, you should not legally be allowed to have children. You would sacrifice them to the state or corporations or whatever cult you believe in, because that's basically what the Fireflies are. They're not some omniscient, all-knowing institution that has any kind of credentials to be able to produce a cure for the zombie virus. It's based on hope. You would sacrifice your child in the name of hope. What the fuck is wrong with you? So again, I think it's pretty clear cut and dry here. Only a fucking psychopath who would sacrifice their young in the name of Moloch would call Joel the villain here, but in Clown World, it really shouldn't surprise me. And the ironic part of this whole discussion is that the people rooting to sacrifice Ellie are never going to have kids. They're the exact type of 30-plus Funko Pop-owning Redditor soy boy subhumans and cat ladies who are going to die alone. So it's not up to you. Joel was the good guy, hands fucking down. Doesn't matter how many bad things he did them for the right reason, just like any good anti-hero. And there's new things I noticed about the story. Again, I haven't played the original in so long and I don't care enough to do a side-by-side comparison, so I'm assuming they didn't change Tess's scenes. But maybe just having to deal with feminist bullshit for 8 years is just far more noticeable how much of a boss bitch Tess is in the beginning of the game. She fucking saves Joel's ass like 3 times, doesn't struggle with killing a shit ton of men, whether it's with guns or stealth killing them or whatever, and she just tries way too hard to be a badass, especially when she looks like a 55-year-old woman in this remake. It just is all the more cringe. And it's hard to say if that was the intentions of the developers back then. 2013 is right around when things started changing for the worse, where wokeism, far leftism, socialism, communism, whatever ism started getting into the mainstream. This game came out just a year before Gamergate, I believe, so that kind of puts it a little bit into perspective, and there was a huge backlash against people who complained about the Mass Effect 3 ending somewhere around this time. I don't remember the details exactly, but there's not a doubt in my mind that Naughty Dog was certainly starting to lean toward that direction, and it sounds like Amy Hennig was holding back the floodgates, and once Neil Druckmann got rid of her, then they just went full woke and didn't give a shit anymore. So at this point, this is just kind of more of a rambly rant sort of thing than a review, as you can tell, because there's nothing to fucking review here, okay? You don't need this video to decide if you want to play The Last of Us again, okay? The real question is, do you want to blow $70 plus tax to play it? I say you absolutely should not. Just fucking break out your PS3 or PS4 and play the original if you really, really want to. Or if you have to have the shiniest, new, most realistic graphics ever, then at least wait until this is half off, dude. $70 for a fucking graphical remake is an absolute ripoff in this day and age, okay? Just look at the Crash Insane trilogy or the Spyro Reignited trilogy. Those were $40 for 3 games made from the ground up. Or, if you want to look at a full-price remake, look at the Resident Evil 2 remake. That was a reimagining. It had completely new gameplay. It shifted the story a bit. It just added so much, while also taking the game in a new direction that a lot of people don't agree with, and I'm kind of mixed on it personally. But I certainly would say that the Resident Evil 2 remake stands on its own, and you can still enjoy the original Resident Evil 2 as well. So, it's sort of unique in that way. There's so many other good examples of remakes. Even if you want to name another remake that came out less than 10 years after its original, you can look at the Resident Evil 1 remake. But that can get away with it because graphics came so far in just 5 or 6 years, however many years it was, that it could get away with updating the visual style, and added a bunch of new content as well. This adds nothing. In fact, it takes away the fucking multiplayer, which a lot of people liked. I even kind of liked the multiplayer for Last of Us, and it's not in this. This is fucking mind-blowing, dude. And then you have Skill Up, commonly known amongst my audience as Shill Up, literally fucking shilling you this game, dude. Listen to this clip.
Now I know why you've clicked on this video.
But it's gonna be just shitting.
If The Last of Us Part 1, the remake of Naughty Dog's magnum opus, a game already remastered on PS4, is worthy of the remake label and worth that $70 price tag. To answer that question, I'm going to enlist the help of my good friend, RoboCop. Now, as everyone knows, RoboCop is the only perfect film. RoboCop has the best cast, the best writing, the best world building, the best action, and the best one-liners of any film ever made. These are scientific facts, and anyone who disagrees with these facts is cringe. RoboCop has been released on a variety of different formats over the years. I've had it on VHS back in the day, then I bought it on DVD, and then on Blu-ray. Most recently,
he really is a shill. Like, is this not a salesman telling you to buy a product? This is one for one, like a car salesman, like, oh dude, you remember RoboCop? You love RoboCop? Well, you need to buy Last of Us 2, or Last of Us Part 1. It's just like RoboCop, dude. You remember how good RoboCop was?
Because RoboCop rules.
This is the worst goddamn analogy. Are you fucking kidding me?
Slightly better than the other versions
I know exactly where he's going with this too. It's like, listen, Last of Us was so good, you need to buy it on every console. Buy 10 million copies. Nobody thinks Uncharted or The Last of Us or God of War 2018 are some of the greatest games ever made because of their gameplay. No, you think that because of the story. Well, video games are a fucking interactive medium. If the gameplay loop, the level design, enemy variety, controls, etc., if that is not the best part of your game, it is not one of the greatest games ever made, period. Okay, I don't want to ramble on about this too much longer. Let me just say, in conclusion, you're free to buy this if you want, obviously. It's still the same great game you played in 2013, even though we've had to deal with almost a decade's worth of Sony cinematic action games, which has really made the tropes of this subgenre extremely annoying and repetitive, and whatever the opposite of innovative is. Derivative, I guess. And if you do buy this, you're supporting more shitty practices in the game industry, namely re-releasing old games with a fresh coat of paint, with nothing of value added to them. In fact, in the case of the Demon's Souls remake, it actually wiped out the original art style and replaced it with a very generic medieval fantasy one, and has one of the worst pause screens I've ever seen in my life. And that might sound like a nitpick, but it's really not. I fucking despised the new equip screen for Demon's Souls, among many other changes that just made the game worse. Honestly, Blue Point just kinda sucks. They're basically the normie remake studio. They can make a game look really pretty and realistic, but it's completely soulless garbage. As for Naughty Dog, I hope they go out of business, and every single fucking person saying The Last of Us is their magnum opus, you're killing this fucking industry. You're exactly the type of people that gatekeeping is supposed to keep out. You just wanted a movie or TV show that's really engaging, and so you had to flood my hobby and ruin it with this crap. Sony used to make really good fucking exclusives. Naughty Dog specifically, Crash Bandicoot 2 is one of the greatest 3D platformers of all time, and in my opinion, their real magnum opus. Which honestly brings me to an interesting point. Sony doesn't have any fucking mascots anymore. Crash Bandicoot was huge, and an actual real rival to Nintendo and Sega's offerings at the time. Spyro not as much, but a personal favorite of mine. There was also Cloud and Solid Snake and Lara Croft. And then once you get to the PS2 era, you had Ratchet & Clank, Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, Kratos. Now look at the state of Kratos. He can't even fucking discipline his child. He used to kill gods, bang every woman he saw. Now he grew a fucking soy beard and mopes about all the bad things he did in his world. Who else are the modern Sony mascots? Fucking Aloy, who looks like Nikocado Avocado after transitioning and having a whale's worth of lard sucked out of him. And I don't know, fucking Ellie, but who still even likes Ellie after The Last of Us 2? At least we can meme Abby into being a likable protagonist. Even Ratchet and Clank got cucked out of being the heroes in their own franchise by alternate universe Rule 63 versions of themselves. And Spider-Man isn't even their character, so he doesn't count. Sony's fucking dead, that's what I'm trying to say. And I just want to remind you all, I am not an Xbox fan, have never been one, and I'm also not a Nintendo fan anymore either, so sorry you can't put me into one of those boxes. I'm not even PC Master Race, I just like good games. And speaking of good games, I actually want to close out this video by recommending you one, because I read a few comments that say I should recommend some alternative games in these modern game reviews, which I think is a pretty good idea. And so, my alternative recommendation for today is Elex 2. Now, I want to give several disclaimers to that. The first of which being, if you know the developer Piranha Bytes, they're the ones who developed the Gothic games and the Risen games. They're basically Eurojank middleware RPGs, kind of similar to BioWare's. Now, I would say Eurojank definitely has a certain charm to it, which is the reason I'm recommending this to you. And Elex is specifically in a post-apocalyptic science fantasy world. And so, in Elex 2, don't worry, you don't have to have played the first one. I also have not played the first one. You start off as a incredibly, pathetically weak guy. Despite playing as a protagonist from the first game, you've been living out in the woods for like a decade, and so you've lost all your skills, and literally start off beating animals with a pipe. And in the beginning of the game, you can just get randomly one-hit killed by monsters, because unlike Bethesda, which has everything in the world level scale to you, or like some other RPGs where different zones of the map have different level ranges, Elex doesn't have any of that. You can fight high-level enemies right in the beginning areas, straight out the gate, and get killed in one hit and not stand a chance. And some of these enemies are standing right next to the fucking rats or wolves or whatever. It really makes no sense from a game design perspective, but it definitely has a certain charm to it. And like I said, there's that jank factor. The melee combat really just doesn't feel that good. The aiming is floaty and has some kind of mouse smoothing or acceleration that just doesn't feel right. But there's something very unique about a game where you can swap from your poison sword to your shotgun to your bow. And there's also a jetpack. And the jetpack actually feels awesome. You can hover in the air and shoot guys, or you can fly straight up. You can jet straight forward in the fastest sprint I think I've seen outside of a Sonic game. A big part of the appeal of this game for me is that zero to hero factor. Going from struggling to kill fucking mutated rats to shotgunning giant trolls and sniping pterodactyl mutant things out of the sky, casting magic from your fingertips, jetpacking halfway across the map. This is definitely the type of game that appeals to those who like RPGs for the number going up factor. Even without damage numbers on, it's obviously noticeable when you one-shot the beginning enemies when it originally took you 5 or 6 hits. And unlike a lot of other RPGs of that nature, I would say it's functional in this game. There's still a reason to kill level 1 enemies at level 20, right? You still get the same amount of EXP, and you can harvest materials from them. And that brings me to another point. This game has infinite inventory space. There's a shit ton of stuff to pick up everywhere, and everything is useful for something. And thank God the developers gave you infinite inventory. This is perfect for somebody like me, the type of guy who's wasted 20 minutes staring at his inventory in New Vegas, trying to debate what to drop. In this, I can just fucking left-click everything, and I'm good to go. But also, it's extremely jank and takes a long time for you to get into it. And of course, there's that RPG factor. There's plenty of quests. Unfortunately, a lot of the quests are collect 10 bear asses, or just kill these guys in this location, or follow this NPC around while they talk about something you don't care about. But there are some great quests here too. You just gotta dig for them. And I think the companions are a somewhat decent selection as well. I think you're really here for the whole experience, because let's be honest, How many BioWare-style RPGs come out in the modern day? Very few. Especially ones that are any good, are basically non-existent. So, Helix 2 is very rough around the edges and takes a long time for you to get into it, but I've been having a lot of fun. If you're looking for a Western RPG in 2022, I would highly recommend checking out Helix 2. That's about it. I'll see you next time, guys.